Hey everyone, let's see. How's everyone's night tonight? Just getting set up here. We're just about to start. Okay, let's give this a pause. Okay, let's jump into it. So we're going to be learning about web development. If I can, let's see. Weird. Anyways, okay, so this stream today, we're going to be learning about web development. I am going to get this set up with my code and such, so on and so forth. Let's do this. There we go. Perfect. Okay. So all that being said and done, we are going to just jump right into things. So web development, what exactly is web development? Why do we value web development? So web development is essentially the creation of web applications for the web. And of course, so much of what we do nowadays, the average person relies on the internet, relies on applications to interact with the internet, utilize the internet, so on and so forth. That's where web developers come in. So with web developers, as web developers, we want to learn how to make these applications, so on and so forth. IMS, NOS, I'm Snow, something like that. How are you doing tonight? Perfect. Okay, so web applications, that's what we're going to learn how to make. So with the web and with the applications used to interface and utilize the web, there's a lot of complexity. There's a whole big world to everything. But at the end of the day, we are going to see what technologies are sort of at the heart of interacting with any one website. We're actually going to be looking at one particular part of web development known as front-end web development, which is essentially developing websites as the user sees them. There's sort of two aspects to web as people think of it nowadays. The front end, the back end. The back end is like the server stuff. It's the stuff that you don't necessarily explicitly see. The front end is the stuff that you do explicitly see and interact with to a large extent. That's where most people start when they learn web development, because it's just so foundational and it's so immediate. Very, very good place to start your learning. So with that, we are going to jump right in and learn a little bit about front-end web development. So let me see if I can work my screen here. Can I do this? Let's see. Okay. Here we go. So we're primarily going to be looking at my code editor. This is called VS Code. If you've ever seen this program before, it's essentially going to let me enter code to make my website. You should look up into either something like VS Code or similar programs. I also have something installed called Emmet, which will allow me to, again, type something and then it'll autocorrect it, or autocomplete it rather. And depending on these choices, I can choose something and it'll autofill code for me. So very, very helpful. VS Code, Emmet, pretty substantially important stuff. So before we even get into writing code, it's a little bit of a foreshadow. Let's go into websites, how websites work, all that fun stuff. So whenever we look at any one website, there's three main aspects to it that we can see and that we'll learn to appreciate. One is the structure or the meaning of the website. The other is the appearance or presentation of the website. And then lastly is the functionality and behavior of the website. So let's kind of break each of these down one by one. So here we're on the Google homepage. The meaning and structure of the website is essentially how the content is laid out on it. So you can see that I have this, I have a search button, the I'm feeling lucky button, the search bar button, or the search bar accessible to me, all these other buttons, the interactable buttons with the search bar. So there's all these entities on screen, all these entities that give meaning and content to the page. Now I can change how these look, which gets into our other aspect, the appearance and styling of things. So if I do, what can we do? Say I want to change this to the color red. I still have my Google search button, right? The meaning is still there, just that the styling is different. So that's your meaning. Now the styling, of course, as we've kind of seen just now, affects the layout and visuals of things. Now the styling is not just about making things nice and pretty, though that is an aspect of it. It's also about making things intelligible and accessible as well. I can really come in here and start to mess things up if I do, I don't know, maybe, there we go. Yeah, look at that. So just with one little aspect, one little variable, I already started to mess things up. So I'll do like, ooh, there we go. Yeah, that's fun. So now I can really go crazy here and really mess things up. I can get the styling all wrong. But of course, we want to do the exact opposite, like we see on the original Google homepage. We want to make sure that the styling is, let's do this. We want to make sure that the styling is in line and supports the meaning and the structure of the page as well. And then finally is the functionality of things. So even though I have, that's weird, I wonder why it's doing that. This, there we go. Okay. So even though we have the meaning to things and the styling to things, yeah, go to inspect element. That'll be super, super helpful as we go along throughout this presentation as well. So with our structure and our styling in place, that does not necessarily mean that we have functionality. This Google search button, to actually make the search, I don't need structure, I don't need styling necessarily to complete that in and of itself. We need functionality and behavior, which is another aspect of any web page. So the structure and the meaning will give me these different elements here, these different entities. The styling will give them their presentation. And then finally, the behavior is why, say, I can click on here and type in LH and have all these pop up, be able to then click the search button so that it responds to my behavior, to my actions. And there we go. So with any web page, you have these three essential aspects: the meaning, the appearance, and the functionality. Now, all of these aspects have their own programming language that we work with to bring about these aspects of any web page. That's what we're going to be introduced to today: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript for meaning, appearance, and functionality, respectively. So this is where our code comes in here. We are going to make a web page in order to, we're going to use those three programming languages in order to make a web page and showcase how exactly they contribute to any web page. So here I have just a basic HTML and CSS file and project, I should say. To get started with any web dev project, at the very least, you need an index.html file. This is what we're going to use to write our HTML. Now, what exactly is HTML? HTML is our language for meaning, for structure. To utilize HTML, we make an HTML file. It doesn't have to be called index.html, but it often is. This is the standard file name, or a fairly standard file name for a home page. And you can see here that if I have, well, actually, let's set a little bit more basic. So I'm going to show you my web page as I have it now. You can see there's no code, so guess what we're going to get? Oh, once it loads, let's see. Okay, there we go. Was that in my Chrome? Yes, it was. Okay, so now you can see my web page here. Absolutely nothing, so it's a complete blank slate. Hey, Gaming School. We're just looking at HTML, CSS, and JavaScript today. We will talk a little bit about React. I'll mention it in terms of how it relates to these technologies, but ultimately we're just focusing on the fundamental tools. So you can see that I have no content in my code, so no content on the page. But what I can do is start to write. This is my web page, so write whatever you want. And it should, well, actually, let me do that. There we go. So you can see the content comes in now. This is my web page. So I could go on and write a big paragraph, so on and so forth, a big article with all sorts of content, so on, all sorts of different things. Not the best way to work necessarily. So HTML is hypertext markup language is what it stands for. This is an HTML file specifically, or technically this is an HTML file. We haven't really seen HTML at its best yet. What we care about is the markup aspect of HTML. We want to be able to give context and meaning to things. So here, if I'm making my web page, in fact, let's call it my web page. Let's say these are some paragraphs for my web page, whatever it is. The code doesn't really know what to make of things. It doesn't really know exactly how to differentiate between, okay, this is the header, this is some paragraphs in my web page, so on and so forth. That's where the semantic aspect of HTML comes in. So to give meaning to these, to any content, including the content here, we're going to add HTML tags. So if I do something like this, I put a header to my page, we can see that, well, it starts to get styled differently. We'll talk a little bit about that later, but we can see that the contextualization, the giving of meaning to different content within our code is now taking place. So I have this is my header tag. Kind of like in an article or in a newspaper, so on and so forth, written media. This is kind of like the title, right? The header of usually your H1, that's the header for your entire page. And now if I use these P tags, we call them, which are paragraph tags, then these are telling the browser, it's telling what page is telling the browser, okay, these are going to be what we call paragraph tags. I mean, of course, people will typically use them for paragraphs of text. And so I can go through and add these guys. Not the craziest thing, but even this so far is incredibly helpful for quite a few reasons. So later on, it's going to help us with styling quite a bit, but it also helps. It helps technology parse a web page to find meaningful information. So, for example, if you have like Google, I'm not even sure exactly what they call it, the sort of like Google's technologies to parse web pages for meaningful information. They're going to look in particular places marked with particular HTML tags, because say your title tag, for example, is probably going to be a lot more relevant for getting the ultimate theme and point of your web page than some random paragraph tag or some other random text within the page. Two, there's also devices like screen readers for people that can't access the web or that don't access the web in the standard way that others may. These semantic tags will provide different ways, alternative ways to meaningfully navigate a web page. Like say with a screen reader, someone maybe they can't see, maybe they have something that's just preventing them from. Essentially, you can build a web page to support and aid that sort of navigation as well. So lots possible with HTML tags. It's quite a big world, but HTML is typically considered not the craziest aspect of web development. It takes a little bit to learn, but once you get a feeling of things and once you kind of get some experience with it, it's not too bad. So let me just check the chat here, see what's going on. Are all tags semantic? Yeah, so I think inherently, as far as I know, they are semantic because I think all tags, well, that's actually a good question. So there are two tags that don't have a specific semantic meaning to them, which we're going to see shortly. They're called the div tag and the span tag. Those are the two that I'm aware of, at least. So, I mean, technically they do, like I would say in the real world, they kind of do impart a certain meaning. They go on to organize information in particular ways, but in and of themselves, they're officially seen as being semanticless. Like they don't have any sort of extra or like inherently embedded meaning to them. That's a good question. Obsidian, honestly, I just got it myself. My one buddy is super, he's super into like all this productivity software and such. He told me about it, so I just recently got it myself. Still have to learn it. Very keen eye though. It's just sitting there on my taskbar. What is the extension you're using for the placeholder text? So that is actually part of Emmet. So I covered this a little bit earlier, but Emmet is essentially allows you can install it into your coding program like VS Code. You can type something and it'll have autocomplete options for you here. So you can see that if I select one of these options, it'll produce that code for me. So one of the things that lets you create this lorem ipsum text, which is just kind of filler text. You can type lorem and this comes up. And then I think if you do, yeah. So Emmet's kind of a big system in and of itself. Very, very helpful to learn. Not big as in intimidating, but big as in it just has a lot of really helpful tools. Like the more that you learn, honestly, the more it enriches your coding workflow. So let's see. So how do you open the site in the web page? Very good question. Honestly, you can just open up index.html. You can just open that file up in your web browser. Typically, if you double click it, like in your Windows Explorer, it'll open up in your default browser. I'm using a special tool right now that allows me to, well, I have to set up a little bit with the HTML so that it can properly interface with this one little program that I'm using within VS Code. But you're going to see soon I have something called, what is it? Live server. I'll get into that in a little bit later. But ultimately, the fast and easy way is you can just open your index.html file by double clicking it or opening it in your Windows Explorer or your file, whatever they call on a Mac or any other operating system, and it should open in your browser. So yes, kind of a first foray into HTML. So the biggest thing so far is, again, HTML is what kind of gives us our content in the page. And we also impart meaning to our content with the semantic tags. So now an HTML page is not just going to be like, say, your H1, your paragraph tag, so on and so forth. Usually there's a little bit more that you need in order to make a viable web page. But we can use this boilerplate. A boilerplate is like a block of pre-written code that is often recycled or that you can use in other circumstances. Here I have a boilerplate of HTML code. I have this code that was pre-written. I generated it with Emmet. And I won't go into how everything works here because it's just it's a little bit much for now. You don't necessarily need to know it right away. But this is going to essentially just help me put together a more viable web page by the end of things. Here with my title, I can edit this and I should be able to display whatever I want here. So if I go put Zane's web page, refresh, there we go, perfect. So HTML can do quite a few things, right? It can display the content on the page. As you saw, there's more metadata-esque aspects to it. There's actually quite a lot possible with HTML. Well, let's put together Zane's web page. Let's use a few more tags. So let's say one, this is my web page. I think we'll save divs for later. This kind of gets you going. So here I put together my very basic page in terms of the HTML. Now we'll see what else we can do with it, but in essence, that's the basics of HTML, I would say, in terms of just the bare bones of getting started. Let's see what else can come to mind. That's essentially it. Again, it's not too crazy. Of course, there's quite a bit more to learn, but that kind of gets you going. The next aspect of web development, and which is deceptively very, very important and has quite a lot to it to learn. Again, not in like a, well, maybe in a little bit of a crazy way, but let's see. Next thing that we're going to learn is the appearance aspect of a web page. So if you remember before, on Google here, in fact, let's do this. I can inspect the HTML of the Google homepage. So you can see there's all these different elements. I mean, once you get to this level of programming, things get a little bit abstract. But there are different HTML elements here on here throughout. So there's the meaning of things. Like if I click on this button, we can see that there's an input HTML element, so on and so forth. And we said earlier too, I can edit the styling of these, right? I can edit how these appear here. So let's talk a little bit about styling now. Let's delve into what exactly that is, what it entails, how we can do it ourselves. So the styling of a web page, we're going to accomplish that with CSS, which stands for Cascading Style Sheets. So CSS has a little bit more to it out of the box compared to HTML. So let's see, with CSS, oops, let me see. Let me go to my little website here. With CSS, we can target things in the HTML file here to style them, to give them different, to just change their appearance in a multitude of ways. So for the CSS code to reflect or to link the CSS file with the HTML file so that what we write in this file here reflects what's going on in the HTML file here, we will have to link these two files. Do link CSS. Again, this is Emmett again. So link relationship style sheet, style.css. It doesn't have to be called style.css. It can be literally anything.css. Style is just, it's one like fairly common standard. But here, what we can do now is I can say my body, let's say we'll have the background color be red. And there we go. Okay, so with any CSS code, can I zoom in here? There we go. So with any CSS code, there's a little bit of anatomy to know. You have the element that you're going to be styling. You have the attribute of that element that you want to style, and then you have like the actual style itself. These have more formal names, but that's essentially all that you need to know. The element that you're styling, the aspect of it or the attribute that you want to style, and then the value that you want to set that style to. And then they have to be in between these curly braces here. So the body is one HTML element, as we can see here. This is where your content goes for your page. I'll have to put it, it's kind of the best way to think about it for now. Your body is where all your content is essentially going to go. So this is like my entire visible web page, essentially. You can see that I changed the background color to red. And so lo and behold, it's reflected here in my page. So we have, let me just check up on the chat. There we go. Okay, so far so good. So now we can see that we can style things. I can target the HTML element itself, like the body tag. Maybe I'll change my header a little bit as well, my H1. Maybe we'll make that, let's do font size, I don't know. Let's do 50, why not? 50 pixels. I can change the color for that. Make it really ugly. There we go, okay. Oh, this is the basics of CSS. You can change the styling of your HTML elements. Now, CSS has a bit involved in it. Well, let me go over some other aspects, some other ways that you can style. Let's say that I'm going to have these multiple paragraph elements, which I could style in and of themselves. Let's say I wanted to style just, we'll kind of do a simple example. I want to style this paragraph element in particular, but not the other three. So let's say this is my web page. I like to code. And what else do I like? I like to teach, we could say. Sure, why not? Here we go. So say I want to target just this one particular entity here, right? This one particular paragraph tag. A couple ways you could do this, but what I want to focus on right now is the concept of the class. So the class is essentially us being able to give a particular name to a particular element. So for this particular paragraph tag, right, with this content within it, I want to give it a particular identifier. So again, I can name this essentially anything that I want. I'll call it maybe intro message. So now with this one here, this is what I'm targeting. I put this class intro message on it to show that it's a class, to communicate to CSS that I'm trying to style a class. I'm going to put a period in front of it. And with this, I can style it. So maybe I want to do, what I want to do here, maybe under, do that. And then let's do, I'll make it all uppercase. There we go. So you can see that I styled just this one element by targeting the class. And then there's one more attribute. We don't really have to know this as of right now, but I figured I'd mention it. IDs, which is, so a class you can put on any element that you, as many elements as you want. So I could put the class on both the H1 and the paragraph tag, and it applies the styling. Anything to do with this particular class will apply to both these elements that have it. So you can see that now this was uppercased, it's capitalized. So I can do, oh, give me 1 second. Let's see. Oh, sorry, I have, okay, so jumping back into this, we have, we can do IDs. IDs only apply to one singular element. You can only have one ID per one singular element. So you can style IDs just like you can style classes, but your best bet, honestly, is to stick with classes. Usually IDs are used for, a lot of times they're used for functionality. There's the whole thing that we can talk about with that. But getting back to classes now, we have, so just more demonstrations of classes, as we can see here. Okay, so that's CSS in a nutshell. In terms of extended concepts with CSS, there's quite a bit underneath the hood, especially if we start to dissect the name behind CSS, cascading style sheets, and exactly what that entails. So the style sheet is essentially the set of CSS rules that we see before us, right? These are telling the web page like how to display the layout, how to design the layout, and how to ultimately make it look and make it function stylistically. The cascading aspect is the other part of the name, which gives a lot of the power to CSS. We have, let's see, body H1. Oh, I have this repeated twice. I don't know why. Let me get rid of that. But with the cascade aspect of CSS, essentially what this does is, well, let me just show you an example. So I have this styling of the H1 here. In fact, let me get rid of, let me comment and see this stuff out just so we can focus on this. Here. Okay, so I'm going to focus on just my H1 here. You can see that I have it colored green. What happens if I do down below, if I say I want the color to be red? Which one is it going to choose? Right? Because we have two conflicting styles here. We have two different rules that we're telling the CSS to enact that conflict. This is where cascading comes in. So cascading is the aspect of CSS that ultimately decides which styles are going to display of conflicting styles. So one rule of cascading is that, well, there's maybe I should go into specificity first. Let me see. Make sure that I'm keeping up with you guys. Yes, exactly, Gaming Skull. That is sort of the syntax to that. Within an HTML element, you want to do class, like here, class, and then within the parentheses, or within the double quotations, you want to put your class name. And in CSS, you can just address the class only with that period at the front. You don't have to. Got it. So with that, let's see. Okay, so with CSS, we can see that with these two conflicting styles, color green, color red, the one that is ultimately going to win out is the color red. Now, the reason for that, again, is because of the cascade effect. So the fact, one of the aspects of CSS, we'll address this in a little bit more detail in a moment, but a style, when it comes to conflicting styles, if all other attributes of the styling are equal, then the style that comes later in the file is going to win. So we can see that, of course, this color red comes after the color green. That's why red wins, and that's why red is ultimately displayed. If I switch these two around to where green is now out front, then we can see that it is green that wins. Let me put this back. And here I did it within the same element, but I can actually do something like this, or say I'm going to target the H1 again. And I'll put the color red down here. Still, the cascade is going to apply, and the cascade rule is going to apply. So with this color green here, this is further up in the file. This one is further down. So again, this red is still going to win. So now with cascade, there's a related concept known as specificity, which comes into play. And specificity essentially says that there are different characteristics to elements that are weighted differently, that are ultimately used to determine which style wins when it comes to the cascade. So for example, I want to pull this up really quickly. Specificity works just as a quick run through, very straightforward and basic understanding of it is that HTML elements have the lowest specificity. Then it goes to classes, then it goes to IDs, and then it goes to, there's quite a few things involved. But for now, we'll just say anything marked with important, which we'll uncover in a second. So specificity. Essentially what this means is, let's do this. I'm going to give, so this H1 has we're going to give it its own unique class, actually. You can put multiple classes on one element. So I'll call this the heading. So we have the heading class here. I want to put it back here. what do we want to call this? Or what color? Let's see. Let me just make it it's kind of blue. Okay, so here's the thing. The class for the heading is farther back in the code than this H1 declaration, this H1 style. Despite that, however, the heading styling is the one that wins. So why is that in particular? That's where specificity comes in. So an HTML element has the lowest specificity out of these aspects here. Classes are higher in specificity when it comes to styling. So even though the heading style is farther back in the file, the class has a higher specificity than the HTML element. So that's why the styling wins out. So you can see here, this is why the heading is sky blue with the class rather than red. Now you can have, there's quite a bit that goes into specificity. It's not as straightforward as this. There's a system that a lot of people will use. I won't get into it too heavily right here, but like elements can have multiple classes, and the more classes that they have, the higher their specificity. They can have, there's all sorts of things that contribute to specificity, but this is the ultimate, this is kind of the basis of the concept that you have to know. Let's see, making sure I'm keeping up on you guys. Is using an important at the end a bad practice? So people will shy away from it and they'll discourage it for when people are first learning web development. Let me explain a little bit about what important is. So say that I have this styling here, right, where we have the heading, we say that it's sky blue, and we have the H1 here where we say it's going to be red. So we know that the heading is going to win out because classes have a higher specificity than HTML elements. But what you can do in your code is you can add this piece of information, the importance tag, I think people will call it. And this has like the highest specificity that you can imagine. So even though the HTML element will lose out to the class, the fact that it has important will bring this right up to the top of specificity priority. So now ultimately the red wins out. So a lot of people will discourage the use of importance. Why? It's mainly discouraged for beginners because when you go on to practice HTML and CSS, you ultimately learn ways to structure your code that will make your projects just not a nightmare to deal with. There's particular ways to structure your code that will make things just so much more readable, so much more reusable, so much more elegant, so much more easily to understand, easier to edit and make changes to. People will bypass those sort of systematic design choices that will really be good for your project. They'll try to get around some of those things by using the importance attribute. So it's kind of seen as a crutch to use important, like for beginners, for people that don't know how to structure their code in a way where it's not needed. But I have seen important used in very particular circumstances by like seasoned programmers. I honestly can't talk too much on the specific contexts where that really works, but 99% of the time, I would say you don't necessarily need it. But you should know how to. Once you get developed enough as a programmer, there'll be certain cases where you'll use it, but like you kind of really have to know what you're doing is the impression that I get from it. If that's of any help. But yeah. So let's hope that answered your question. Perfect. Awesome. Okay. So here's us using CSS in a basic way. We covered the cascade aspect. Let me see. Now, there's a couple other aspects to cover as well. Another big one of CSS is something called inheritance. So we can see that in the HTML code, like within this body tag, for example, I have the H1, the 3 paragraphs here. They're all embedded within this body tag. In fact, I can do a little bit more here. Let's say I want to do, what do I want to do? So I'm going to group these. I'm going to group these 2 paragraph tags together because they're talking about things that I like. So they're kind of like their own standalone content. You could see them in a way, kind of their own little entity. So let's do this. Okay, so I have this div tag here. We actually brought this up earlier. A div is a semantic list tag. It essentially doesn't mean anything in terms of HTML, but it does have its uses. For example, I put these 2 paragraph tags into this one div tag. I can give this div tag a class and I can style it. So let's do things I like. And so I can go into style this, things I like. And we can do, what do we want to do with it? Let me get rid of this actually. Okay. So here's the big thing about inheritance. Well, here's what inheritance essentially is. I can apply styles to this div, which is the parents of these 2 paragraph tags here, which are the children. So I can style the parents and have styles applied to the parent trickle down to the children. So I'll show you what I mean. For this div here, for the parent, I can say, let's make the font size 20 pixels. Now, if you see, once I refresh this, you can see that the font of both of these paragraph tags get bigger. Or I can, maybe let's do something that's a little bit more stand out as well. I can make the text purple, for example. Even though I didn't style this paragraph tag directly, I didn't style this paragraph tag directly, I styled the parents. This is known as inheritance, where children can inherit the styles of their parents, the HTML element that is a level or several levels above them. Very, very important aspect of coding because it just makes things so much, just makes your code less verbose, more elegant. You can, for example, right, if I could write particular classes for these 2 elements and give them the exact same stylings by doing that, or I can be a little bit more elegant and set this up where I can just say the div is going to be styled as these. Everything within the div is then is given these styles. And 2, this is just a little bit more reusable because say I want to add more elements over time, perhaps, and I want them to have the same styling. Well, now I have a system in place that automatically takes care of that. So let's see. So inheritance is pretty important. The last thing that is incredibly important to know with CSS for now, this is a little bit more developed in terms of CSS knowledge, but it is something that every front-end web developer will have to tackle fairly early on, is responsiveness. So whenever you go on a web page, in fact, let me check in the chat really quickly, just make sure I'm keeping up with you guys. Okay, perfect. So whenever you have a web page, it's not always going to look the same on every single device. I'm primarily talking about screen sizes, right? So if I have Google open, or if I have maybe a website like YouTube or Reddit, let's go on YouTube. It opens up. So we can see that the content is laid out to match the dimensions of the screen, right? It makes sense for this screen. But let's say I have a smaller screen, like let's say I'm on a tablet or I'm on a phone. The layout starts to change to accommodate the screen size. Well, it kind of gives up at smaller screen sizes. That's pretty normal. But as you can see, when I go to, let's do this. Oh, wow. Okay. Let's go to, I think Reddit is a better example of this. So you can see that as the screen gets smaller, the page starts to change its attributes to sort of match the screen. It's especially noticeable if I don't know why this is fighting me right now. Oh, man, I do not want to go on Reddit right now. Oh, this is annoying. Oh, unless Reddit just changed its, no, I was going to say. Yeah, so obviously on desktop, Reddit looks very different compared to on mobile. And as I change the screen size, the layout of the content is going to change, right? So I have this thing on the side here. As I make it smaller, though, we can see that the nature of how the content is laid out is quite different. So the website is not doing this. Well, a website is not just going to do this by itself, right? It's not going to do this just by writing basic CSS here. You have to ultimately write particular code for this behavior. We call this responsiveness when the website changes its layout due to like changes in screen sizes, for example. That's kind of the big aspect to this. So there's quite a few things to tackle with responsiveness. A couple things that are very, very good to know is, well, I guess the first thing that we can tackle is media queries. So how does the screen, or how does the web page know that, say, well, we can actually watch this if we look at the pixels here in the corner. If I'm at, how many pixels did that take place at? It's like maybe 175 pixels. At 175 pixels, what causes this to only display 2, for example? Or at, which one is this going to be? At like 960 pixels, it looks like. What causes this to go away and to appear again? Depending on screen size. That's where media queries come in. So media queries are essentially how they work, how they function, is that you set a screen width size and you say, okay, so at this screen width, I want you to do this behavior. If the screen is at this screen width, I want you to do this. If it's not, then you can do this. So let's go ahead and set one up. Let's do media query. I'm drawing a blank right now. Let me see. One very important aspect of coding is making sure that you can Google things. So I haven't been dealing with web development too much lately. So the exact syntax for setting up media query is escaping me. But a very good and very important thing to point out, is actually a very good opportunity, is you're going to get rusty on things. You will have to kind of refresh yourself on the particularities of things. As long as you understand how things work, you tend to be pretty good. How to do particular things, however, is as long as you understand the concept, you should be pretty good. In terms of the particularities, you might have to look them up every now and then, which is my case right now. So here, I want to do min width. So that's how I would set it up. I have my at media, which is telling the web page that I want to do a media query. Min width. Let's maybe do like 3 pixels. It's not, oh, okay, not curly braces. Oh my goodness. Oh, it's been a minute since I've done some straight up CSS with media queries. So now that I have this set up, essentially what this is saying is that for screen sizes smaller than 500 all the way up to 500, I'm going to want you to do a certain behavior. So I can say I want you to make the body, or let's make it gray. Why not? So if I go to my little web page here, so up to 500 pixels screen size, the web page is going to be gray. Well, this is much bigger than 500 pixels at the moment. So we are going to have to play with our screen size until we hit that 500 mark. So you can see the pixels right here. If I go smaller, 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 once I hit under that 500, it turns gray. So now typically you're not going to want to be making background color changes with media queries. You're going to be making layout changes, as we saw, for example, in Reddit, so that the page can fit your screen with in a reasonable way. Right? We saw at the very beginning of this stream how I was changing the styling to just act very wonky and just not nice. You want your styling to act nice and to respond and to your to any given situation, screen size, what have you. Media queries is one of the ways that we do so. So we saw media queries they can affect a lot of things, but a lot of times people will use them for layout. One of the other aspects that we want to deal with in terms of layout is another CSS property called flex. We can cover flex. We should be good. So I'm going to cover HTML and CSS a little bit more, but and then we'll kind of utilize them in a project so we can see exactly how they work in actual practice. Then we'll do a little bit of JavaScript, and with that, we should have touched upon enough for the evening. But I think I'll show you flex in context of an actual project. So let's do this. Now that we've seen how HTML works, right, the meaning of the page, and we've seen how CSS works, right, the appearance of the page, let's go on to do a little project. We'll get started on one. So if you haven't heard of it yet, there is a very handy site called Front End Mentor, which has, let me show you this, Front End Mentor. So again, we're looking at front end web development right now with HTML and CSS. This website, Front End Mentor, has a lot of great projects that you can download and try to make yourself. So they give you the designs, they give you some starting code, and with them, you can practice your Front End Mentor skills. So for example, you'd have to make this little component or pop-up entirely from scratch with HTML and CSS. So with that, we are going to make this NFT preview card. It's called NFT preview card component. So I already downloaded the code and the starter code and the design aspects off of Front End Mentor, and I have the very start of that within this project or within this folder here. So I can start this and show you what pops up. Okay, so let's close this stuff out. Where's my style.css? Here we go. Okay, so I wrote some CSS code here already. We'll kind of delve into what exactly is going on. But let's see. So the main files, again, that we're going to be looking at for this project is going to be the HTML file, the index.html, and the style.css, right? The HTML is going to allow us to put content on the page and give that content meaning to boot. And the style.css is going to let us change the appearance of things. So here I have my body tag. So every web page has to have a body tag, every HTML page. Here we have it here. And within the body tag is what we're going to put our content in. So let's just get to writing our HTML. So with every HTML file, you are also going to have something called a main tag. So on web pages, you'll often have, say, a header and a footer, which also have their own HTML tags. And the header and your footer are the content. It's like, oh, everyone knows what a header and footer is. So if I scroll down on here, right, here's the footer of Front End Mentor, for example, right? I have all these links that you can access, and usually it's on every single page. Right, so it kind of stands alone. It stands separately from like the specific web page that I'm on. Right here, I'm on the home page, and there's content specific to the home page. Contrasted against, like, say, the header, which is again on every page that you can access on every page, and the footer, which is on every page, which you can access on every page. The header and the footer are kind of their own set things. But the main is the content that is particular, that is specific to any given specific page. So here, in this, let me go back to my web page under construction here. So we can actually look at the design here. It's a pretty bare bone page. It's just this one like little pop-up. No header and no footer, so I'm not going to be needing those. But I am going to use a main tag because, again, essentially every page is going to have a main tag because every page has some sort of central contents that's going to be featured. I can do that, and I can put all of my code within it, all of my like main content at least. But if I had any HTML for my header and footer, I'd put it in those respective tags, but this is all just going to be under the main tag. Okay, so this is particular content for this page. Now I want to build this component here. I actually want to set this up. So we can see we have like an image here. We have this title for it, some information here, like a little paragraph. And then we have these two stats for it, and then this attribution. So here we're actually going to set up, so you can see that we have the text here, but it doesn't have the proper semantics. And two, there's no way that I can style this, like this title, this heading, for example. There's no way that I can style it specifically without putting some semantics or any kind of tags, really. So I need the tags not only to give semantics to this information, to give it meaning, but also so that I can target them specifically for particular styling. Because obviously, like this heading is styled differently from this, we just style differently from this, so on and so forth. So I'm going to go on and style this. So you can see that I have this this whole component here. I'm going to have to add this image. I'm going to have to have a whole container for all of this information because I want to style this container as its own one entity. So for that, I'm going to use an article tag. You don't really have to worry too much about this, but I could use a div, as we saw earlier. I'm going to use an article tag because an article tag is for like a piece of content that kind of stands alone in and of itself, which fits this component here very nicely. But essentially, the article tag, I'm going to style it to make it into this overall box. And I'm going to put everything inside of it. So I have that, and then I'm probably going to need an image tag as well. Let's see if they gave me that image. They should have. Yep, there it is. So I have the image here, and I can utilize that by going to images, and let me do HTML. Is image equilibrium. Okay, so I have that image loaded up, and if I refresh this, we should be able to see it. There it is. Okay, so I have this image here, and then let me give the appropriate semantics to this element here. So I have a header within it. So I guess I'll make it an H1. So as I said earlier, the H1 is typically like the main heading for the page. Normally it wouldn't be, like this wouldn't be the H1 for the entire page in a typical context. But we can see here that this is supposed to be a whole web page here in a way, but there's just no other content. So this by default kind of becomes the H1, I would say. Don't think about this too hard. One here. Then we're also going to have this little paragraph here. So we can put, conveniently, we can do a paragraph tag for that. Move this up. Oops. Okay, so we're getting there. Now I have here, I have like this ETH stat, and then I have this like this time stat, and they each have their own little icons here. So in terms of how I want to do this, because normally, let me check the chat for a second. So media reprints the viewport height and what represents the, yes. Yeah, exactly. So media is going to represent the viewport height and or width, depending on how you use your media query. So what do I want to say for this? Do not want that. This 15%. Okay, so let me get back to this. Okay, so talking about the layout for this portion here. So I'll code this up first, and I'll kind of talk about well. So eventually your HTML and your CSS get so intertwined that you kind of have to think about both when you write them. For example, I'm going to want this ETH on the left-hand side. I'm going to want this time thing of content on the right-hand side. Now, if I were to just code this up normally, they're probably just going to sit right next to each other. Like this is probably going to get moved all the way to the left, unless I give some very specific CSS to make it so that it does not do that, so that it does sit on the opposite side here. The way that I'm going to have to do that is I'm going to first make a larger container. So you can see I have this box here. I'm going to wrap this all into one singular container, right, represented by this highlighted box. So I'm going to make a div here. So I have my div, which represents this box. And you can see that I have this, right, this text here, this ETH, as it's like one own little entity. And then I have this state here as its own entity. So I can just do, what do I want to do for those? I guess I could just do, like a span tag that works fine. I'll talk about what a span is in just a moment. Do span. Put these in here. And now I have these two here, right? So like I said, they're just going to sit side by side with each other. But what I can do is on this div, I'll call this the stats. I can use a layout technology in CSS known as flex. And let's do justify. I'll kind of talk about this in just a moment. Let me do. Okay, so now they moved over. Right now I have this on the left-hand side, this on the right-hand side. So flex is its own thing to talk about in and of itself. It's quite the topic. Again, not that it's like crazy difficult or anything. It's just that there's a few things that you should learn to really make your understanding and utilization of CSS very rich. But it essentially gives me the ability to make certain layout choices and certain layout gives me power over the layout in quite a few ways that we never really had before in CSS before Flex came around. So you can see here that I was able to easily put these two off to the side as I wanted. And still, I have these little icons that I want to put within, that I want to group together with this text here. You can see too, right? This is like one box, right? So I'm gonna write up the HTML where I have that in there, and then I can also put what does that save as? SVG. Here, probably just do a image. Images / Ethereum. If I do this, yeah. So now this little icon loads. So now I can do the same thing. So yeah, let's see. So now I have this box here where I have the icon and I have the ETH, but as in my site, they're kind of sitting on top of each other. Like this has its own long box here. This has its own like a longer box. What I want to do instead is have these sit side by side. Again, you'll have to delve into Flexbox a little bit to understand exactly how this works, but I can easily just use Flexbox on this guy here and say, let's say you flex. Again, you can call this anything that you want, but I'll call this uFlex. Let's do display flex, and it will automatically set these guys so that they're sitting side by side. There we go. So there they are. And I can do additional things with flex, like I can put a gap in between these two elements here. So if I do gap maybe like 10 pixels, it's trying to get underway. And let's just do the same thing here. So I'm going to copy that structure for this content on the right-hand side, right? So this also has its own little icon, has its own text. They both are within like an overall box here. And they're both within this overall box. So I have this overall box here, which houses both of them, which houses both the left-hand side and the right-hand side content right here. And then I'm just going to copy this structure and put in the necessary info. So I have this 3 days left. Just put that text here. Get the appropriate icon. Save that, and now I should have this. So there we go. So now these guys are positioned on the other sides of the screen as I want them to be. Let's kind of clean this up a little bit and make it so that this is just starting to look nicer. So let's see. I actually wrote some classes beforehand. I'll apply them and kind of talk about how they work. The body, you can see, so with CSS, you can also add fonts. So I have the particular fonts utilized here. If I did not use those fonts, it's not going to look as slick as the original design, right? You have like a serif font here. We have like these edges, not very modern in terms of web design. So a font like this outfit, it's called, we use. I have this dark blue color backgrounds. Certain things with layout and placement. I changed the text color, I changed the font size so that these things are just reflecting the actual design here. So that's the body. And then I made a class called card, which is what I'm going to apply to this, to the overall box of the component, right? It's this whole thing. I'm going to call this the card. So I'm going to give this article here, which is representing my card, which is functioning as my card in terms of the CSS, or in terms of the HTML rather. We're going to do that, and then the style should apply. Here we go. So let's talk about what's going on here. So what exactly did I do? So I gave the card a fixed width. I gave it a width of 350 pixels. Without that, it would just be, kind of big. We don't want that, so I limited it here. This is not, so there's a whole discussion in terms of, let's see, do I even want to get into this? Usually you don't use pixels for things like this. There's actually other, what do they call them? There's other units of CSS that you can use. Like instead of pixels, people don't typically use them because they're not responsive. They don't, I don't know. There's a huge thing to it. There's other units like rems or ems or VH, VW. Those are very, very important to learn once you go on to be a bona fide front-end developer. We're just going to stick to pixels for now because people kind of intuitively get it. I limited the size of this with pixels by changing the width property. The background color I also changed. You can see it's a bit lighter than the body backgrounds. Padding gives some white space to the content, you could say. So without padding, everything is kind of scrunched together. But with padding, I'm going to have the space that's added onto the sides. There we go. Border radius gives the curvature to the borders here. So you can see that I have some border radius applied. If I take it away, I get these points at the edges. Again, not typically what people will use in modern graphic design for websites. Typically there's curves and such. So that's what we have here. Let's see, so I changed the color of the header. I have, let's see, stat group I used for that there. But I mean, I think with this alone, you start to get a feel for like how CSS and HTML are used in the actual project. I mean, this is just one little component. But we can see that like on a real world website, like say Reddit, for example. You can see here we have this this box here that has, for example, all these different things of content here that are going to have their own HTML element. Like maybe this here, right? We have this little icon here. We have this text here. This is probably its own. This is going to be its own HTML element. This is going to be its own HTML element, most likely. They're probably going to be grouped together within this button here. And I don't know. There's so many ways that you can interpret websites now. Now that you have the basic tools of HTML and CSS and the basic understanding of them, like at your fingertips, you soon realize that you can break the web down into a bunch of boxes and just like boxes within those boxes. So I don't know, it's just pretty powerful stuff. But anyways, that is like a pretty good primer into HTML, CSS as applied in a real project. So let me just make sure I'm keeping up with you guys. Yep, exactly. But CSS Tricks is a very good website from what I've read and from what I've heard from others as well. And yes, AMS, REMS, view height units, view width units, those all have their own place. A little bit in depth what we're doing today, but definitely things that a dedicated web developer is going to want to learn. A dedicated front-end web developer at the very least. Okay, so with that, let's do a little bit of JavaScript. Because remember, there's 3 aspects to your basic web page. As we covered before with HTML, you have your content and your meaning. You have your styling of things. Let's go back to Google here. And then you have your functionality and your behavior. Right? Like the fact that I can click on this and something happens. The fact that I can type in here and then I can click this button here and something happens to it, right? Buttons can do quite a lot of things. How does it know that when I click this button, I want to use the content within this field to make a web search? That's where JavaScript comes in. So HTML and CSS, people don't consider them like bona fide programming languages. They are languages in and of themselves. I've heard them called like markup languages, whereas JavaScript is a bona fide programming language. So programming languages like JavaScript, other languages like Python, Swift, they have their own sort of logic, fundamentals, concepts to them. Let me just show you kind of how JavaScript works very, very briefly. So you can access JavaScript in most, or at least any browser that I've tried. You can access it by taking up your browser. We can use the console here. I'll kind of show you JavaScript at its most basic. So here I can do with JavaScript, I can do like basic arithmetic. I can do like mathematics with it. I can do this if I go alert. This is a test. There we go. So I can give a notification in the browser with it. As you saw, I could give like functionality to buttons, so on and so forth. JavaScript is all about behavior, functionality, just making things do things in response to things. It is kind of the basis that any beginning front-end web developer needs to know. So with that, let's open up. Let's make a JavaScript file. Let's start playing with it. Let's see what goes on with it. So zoom out a little bit. Yes. So I guess we can go back to my little website, my little blog that I'm making. Share them with you guys still. Yeah. So let's say that I want to add a button. So there's a specific HTML tag for that. I'm going to do a button. Have it say click me. Is that not live anymore? Huh. That's weird. Oh, this comes still in here. This one. This out. This, that. Let's go back to this one. So I'll put my button here that says click me. There it is. So if I click it, nothing's going to happen because it doesn't have any functionality. It doesn't know what to do upon being clicked. That's where JavaScript comes in. So with JavaScript, I can give directions for, I can give behavior, essentially. So a lot of people, again, you can call this file essentially anything that you want. app.js is a pretty standard name. First, just like how I had to link my CSS file with the HTML, I'm going to have to link my JavaScript file with the HTML file. And so I'm going to do a little test, console.log. This is a test. Console.log essentially just means it's going to print to the browser's console, which sounds pretty crazy, but it's just gonna like give me some feedback here. I can press F12 on Chrome, this pops up, and I can just test things here for JavaScript. So you can see that it did print, that it did indeed print. So my JavaScript file is synced up with my HTML file, which is exactly what we want. So for this button, I want to give it some functionality. So I want what I can do in JavaScript here is, now this is, I mean, there's quite a bit that goes into JavaScript, but we'll see. Well, I guess we'll just focus on like how it interacts with the web page at first. So in terms of like what all this code is, don't really worry about it too much. Document that query selector. What I want to focus on instead is just like the results of what it's doing. So I'm saying, hey, I want you to, I'm like making JavaScript cognizant. I'm making it aware that this button exists. And I'm going to give this button a nickname. I don't want to like I'm going to have to use this to like refer to it, this huge thing of code. I don't want to do that. I want to say button, I'm going to give it a nickname. Button here, I want it to be, instead of this long name here, I'm going to give it this nickname button. And let's put this away. Okay, so now I have my button here that I can refer to with this. And with the button, I want to say, okay, well, upon being clicked, so add event listener, just saying, hey, when an event happens to this button, and the only events that are really going to happen to a button is being clicked. When this button is clicked, upon being clicked, I want you to do this. I could say, the button style. Ooh, again, this is one of those things where, again, sometimes Googling comes up when you do these things. So if I want to style HTML element, JavaScript, style property. Oh no, let's see. Let's do style, JavaScript. Very good resource for this is known as MDN Docs, which is like Mozilla, the people that make Firefox. They have a really good resource for programming knowledge. Well, let's see. So style. Okay. So it looks like I can just do. I guess this is right. So style. So I can take my element. So here it's saying that I can take my element, do dot style, and then tackle the attribute that I want to color or that I want to style. So here, for example, I can do button dot color dot dot style dot color. So I'm going to change the text color of the button to, let's do red. Why not? What this is saying is that I'm having JavaScript recognize that I have a button. For my button, when I click upon it, I want it to change the button's text color to red. So let's see if that works. Boom, there we go. So upon clicking it, it changes its color. So again, you're probably not going to be changing button text colors with JavaScript. Instead, it's typically going to be things like if you have like if you, again, like with Google, for example, right? I have this information in this field. Upon clicking the button, I want the information in the field to be used in a URL to search for particular data. Or what are some other uses for buttons that we could, or just kind of JavaScript in general that we could do right here, right now? I don't know. Like that's kind of the basic concept of it and all. I'm sure there's some other. Let me see. I made some notes out, so I'll make sure that I'm touching upon everything that will be helpful for you guys. I guess we can go more into the more of the like foundations of JavaScript and how that ultimately brings up to what we're seeing here. Let me see if anyone has any questions as of right now. Let's see. So does it matter where you put the .js link in the HTML file? If we put the JS file in the bottom, does that mean the web page will load the JS file last as opposed to putting it on top? Yeah, so from what I understand, so typically the order does matter in your code. So from what I understand, at least, you put the JavaScript file at the very end because like you want all this stuff loaded up first before you add the interactivity to things. Because like in this JavaScript file here, like I said, I want it to be aware of this button, for example. However, the button is like further back here. So it has to be able to recognize that like there's a button entity that it's trying to target before it can kind of like take it and apply all the functionality to it. So that is why it's pretty standard for people to put the JavaScript file, like the file in the HTML at the bottom here for that reason, to the best of my understanding. There are ways that you can put it on top. Like there are ways that you can do it to where I can say, okay, well, I want this to be on top and I want the web page to load this like later on. But that's kind of, it's kind of deeper than I want to get into today. But you were right on the money in terms of concepts, underdog. So it is better if it loads before you use a web page. It does not optimal user experience. Yeah, essentially. Perfect. Okay, so let's delve a little bit more into JavaScript as a just programming language in and of itself. So we saw JavaScript applied to a web page. Let's kind of just understand like what all goes into a programming language. What is there to know so that we can utilize JavaScript in a more just more like just so that we have more possibilities. I'm going this stuff out for now. This code is not active. So with any programming language, with any bona fide programming language, again, like JavaScript, there's a few key concepts that you want to know. One of these are data types. So data types are essentially just the different types of data, as is said in the name. You often have things like numbers. I'll show this on the console. Kind of more immediately I'll work with this here. So we have numbers, like I can have JavaScript do math for me, 1 + 1, 1 + 2, yada, yada. I can also have, so numbers are one type of data type. Numbers. We also have strings. And strings are basically just like plain text. Hello, my name is Zane. Just plain text. I can put that, for example. So this console.log again just kind of prints things to the console, which is just this area here. So you can see that I printed my string. There's also true and false values, Booleans, if you remember from middle school math class at the release. If I do is 1 greater than 2, of course it's going to be false. 1 greater than, or is 2 greater than 1, it's going to be true. So Booleans are baked in. Those are kind of the big ones that you need to know about for now. So even with these guys, you start to unlock some different logic that you can do. With Booleans, you have things like conditionals, which is just another aspect of programming languages. So I can say if 1 is greater than 2, I want you to console.log. Math is broken. And I can say else if 2 is greater than 1. Oops. Should be else if 2 is greater than 1. We can say that math works. So I'm saying I have this conditional setup, which is essentially just like if one thing is true, then have it do this thing. If it's not true, then go to the next thing. And if this thing is true, then do this one thing instead. So ultimately, only one of these things are going to take place. Either this is going to print to the console, or this is going to print to the console. Oops. So let me get rid of this stuff. Strings, booleans, which is kind of what we're dealing with right now. So we can see that if 1 is equal to 2, or if 1 is greater than 2, this is not true, right? So is it? No, it's not. So this is not going to take place. It's not going to say that math is broken. Else if 2 is greater than 1, which is true, which is the case, then it says, okay, so then we'll do what's in here. So it prints math works. So with conditionals, so here we kind of we've seen like how to utilize these 3 different data types that we were talking about, right? We have this, which is really just another way of saying true, right? If I say if true, I'm sorry, this is another way of saying false, I should say. If false, if true, then do this. So again, this is, even though there's numbers involved here, there is a Boolean aspect to this ultimately. It ultimately leads to a Boolean. So we have numbers here, ultimately leads to a Boolean, numbers here, ultimately leads to a Boolean, and then we have strings here, right? So those are like those are kind of like the basic data types that you have to know for right now and how we're utilizing them there. So that's JavaScript in and of itself. But again, ultimately what we're interested in is how JavaScript applies to a web page and what we can do with it. So using those basic data types and using things like the conditionals that we just saw, or the if else, so on and so forth, we can go on to do more elaborate things with our web pages. So if I want to say, going back to this button here, I can change the style of it we saw. I can say, I can change the button's text. Let's do HTML equals you clicked me. So now you can see that I use a string here. Well, technically I use a string here too. Well, I don't want to say this. Just thinking about how to juggle our different data types in a nice, clean way. But so different utilizations of JavaScript there. I think with the remaining time, we'll look at how to build a more sophisticated design with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript as well. Because we saw before, we had this NFT preview card website. We used basics of HTML, basics of CSS. I think it'd be fun to do something with basics of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript now that we've seen how they all work. Again, before we tackle that, let's just do a little bit of review. We looked at the Google homepage before. Again, any singular web page, you are going to have 3 big things to it. You're going to have the meaning, which is your HTML, the appearance, which is your CSS, and the functionality, which is your JavaScript. So now that we've sort of seen how all those have worked, let's put it into practice for a full-fledged little web page. We'll see what we can get done. We have about 30 minutes left on that. But with that, I think we should be able to, I think we'll be able to showcase some good knowledge, some good concepts. So let me go track down, let me go open my folder for that. In fact, I have a little project here that we can do, the Sunnyside website. So design, okay, cool. So I'll just share my screen again, actually. Pull this up on screen. Okay, so let's pull up this guy. So again, going on Front End Mentor, I'm going to show you what this looks like. So if we go on Front End Mentor, Sunnyside projects, we ultimately have this nice, beautiful little website. I seem to have, I think I'll be okay without the design file. But I mean, just looking at this now, whenever, well, let's just kind of delve into this in terms of we're actually trying to build this, right? Let's think about like how we should approach this, what we should do in terms of like how to real world take a design file and turn it into a bona fide website with HTML, CSS, JavaScript. So I didn't make mention to this before, but typically when you work on a real website, you're going to have some sort of design file to go off of. We get a sneak peek of this here, where we have this like the layout and just how everything is supposed to look, all the content, so on and so forth. Now, this Front End Mentor website will actually give you a Figma file or a Sketch file. Figma and Sketch, they're two different programs. I think Figma is a web app, actually, that will allow you to just see like all the attributes and measurements and so on and so forth, content of a particular design. So I actually have the Sunnyside Figma file here. So I'm going to open this up in my browser. Just give me one moment for this. Okay, so that is importing right now and just successfully finished. So let's do share screen once more. So here we have the design file. So again, on Front End Mentor, you can just go, you can download the design file. I got the Figma file because I use Figma myself, very popular with web development of the people that I know at least. And I open it right up and now I can interact with the design. So for example, I can see like the dimensions of the website. I can see like the font style being used here, the font size. Right, font style is this France's. You can get the font size too. Oh, following fonts are not available. That's okay. I can see the border radius and the font colors, or just the colors in general, right? For like this button here, for the background, all that sort of stuff. So very, very helpful to have your design file. Now, as I pick this apart, there's a couple things that I want to look for. Again, I said earlier that your HTML and CSS, they are very closely tied to each other in the real world. How you write your CSS is going to affect how you write your HTML and vice versa. They're really not separate things. So like a very, very big insight and a very, very big thing to take away is I've presented you HTML, CSS, and JavaScript as three distinct like entities, but ultimately you kind of have to use them all as one to accomplish the ultimate goal, which is making your web page here. So as I said, and as I go on to design this, you're going to see that your HTML and CSS, for example, you're going to be writing the two in reference to each other. Right? One is going to affect the other. So, for example, when I look at this, I already know that, okay, well, for this header here, for example, I'm going to have a box here with all this stuff on the left-hand side, possibly, where all this is grouped together. So I'm going to have a div there, and I'm going to have this image here, and I'm going to have them all in one single box here to where I can use like flex, to put these on the opposite sides. So again, I'm going to have to be making some divs in my HTML to separate the content in that way. Let's see, what else does this tell me? So I'm gonna have to do some spacing with CSS between these, like this title and this paragraph and this, it's probably gonna be a link here, right? You're gonna wanna click on that where it says learn more. Let's see, okay. So I already see I'm gonna have a header here for my nav bar. I'm gonna have a footer here, and I'm gonna have like my main content here. So already delving into the HTML here, I can start to code those things in. Next on HTML, front-end mentor gives you some things that you don't really need, like this attribution stuff. It says that you can include it whether you want to or not. I don't like having it myself. And I think there's probably a yes at the bottom. Okay, so let's get rid of that. Okay, so here is all of my content here. So you can see that this about, services, projects, contact, that is all going to be part of the header. Sweet, all because I have to now. Okay, so this is all going to be part of the header. So I'm going to place that in the header. Well, I said too that I have a footer here, so I'm just going to pull that in right now. And footer, and then all this stuff is our main. So I'm going to add that main tag. Main. I'll place this stuff in the header for now. We'll kind of get back to formatting it nicely later. Now in the footer, what am I going to have? I'm going to have the sunny side image, and then the about, the social links. This projects, contact. Okay. So I'm also going to put this in the footer. Okay. And then I don't need this contact here. They kind of just, I'm going to use these social links instead. So might have been an oversight by the person doing that, or I don't know. But I'm gonna get rid of that. Then I have the main, which is all of this stuff. So I can just take all of this. Oops. Make sure that I'm, oh yeah, sorry. Let me do this. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. Let's see. Okay, so essentially, honestly, I have to get some dual monitors at some point because it's very easy to lose myself. So anyways, we're going to be making this design. So I have this stuff up here, which is going to be my header. I have this stuff down here, which is going to be my footer. And I have all this stuff here, which is my main contents. So you can see that in the code here. I have my header, which has like these links here. I have my footer, which has these links here. And then I have my main content here, which is going to be all this stuff. So I'm going to move that into my main tag. There we go. Okay, so all that is within my main tag now. Okay, so I have some basic semantics in place. I'm also going to have to get, say, like the image here. So within my header, I'm going to add that image. And then what is this called? Logo.svg looks like. So I do image, source, do logo. All right, it's going to be in the images folder, logo.svg. And that should pop up. Oh, actually, let me do this. Here we go. Is it just white? Is that why it's not showing up? Yeah, okay. So let me load up let me get a CSS file going as well. So like that CSS, style.css. Now we have to make the CSS file also. So I'll do style.css. Let me test this is working by styling the body, for example. There we go. So this is linked up with it properly. And now we can see, right? We had the white logo on the white background, couldn't see it. But now with this, We can leave this red here for testing purposes. That's kind of common. I still want to worry about the CSS right now. But you can see that I have the image in here now in the header, and then I have these links here. I guess we can focus on the header for right now. So again, this is stuff that you'll pick up once you really delve into web development. But we consider this whole thing to be a list of items, right? Because they're all kind of part of this navigation aspect here. So with that, we can actually do this. Again, there's a lot of HTML elements for semantic reasons. So here I have this nav element, which is saying, hey, this is navigation information, right? There's going to be links in here that is going to help you navigate. So a lot of times people will put these in a list, an unordered list, because it doesn't really matter like what order they're in the real world. And for every list, we're going to put a list item. So we use this li element. We're going to have 4 of these. So I'm going to do this for now. We're going to have 4 of these. So again, within my header here, I have both the logo, which is represented by this image, and then I have this these navigation links, right? And so this is like a little navigation section within the header. So I have this navigation tag that is sitting within, and we consider a lot of times, like 99% of the time, we just put this in an unordered list. We're saying that this is like a list of different links that you can access. And for these links, we put each of them into a list item tag to show that it kind of relates to this list ultimately. So that gives us our HTML there. So we can already see that there's going to be some stuff with styling, like these are stacked vertically when they shouldn't be. They have these dots in front. So there's going to be some styling that I'm going to have to do right off the bat. But we'll worry about that in 1 second. One final aspect of this, because these links are, just from having used websites, I'm sure we all know that these, again, are going to be navigation. So these are going to be things that you can click that will then, take you to different places in the website or outside of it. So we call these, so for these links, we use anchor tags, we call them. Essentially, an anchor tag is going to send you someplace. And it's href here. It's like the URL that we would put. So if I wanted this to send me to Google, I'd say, okay, when the person clicks this link, take them to google.com. Typically, you're not going to go to, something like that. You usually go to like someplace else within the website, or, to an outside website that relates to whatever it is that you're trying to link to. But for now, we can just do, if we just put what's that called? People call them hashtags nowadays. I guess the pound symbol, ampersand, I think it may be. No, we'll just call it pound symbol. Once you use the pound symbol here, that just tells you that you can go to the home page. So we'll just keep it as that for now. We'll put all of these in anchor tags. So if we do, yep, we can say wrap in an A tag. Perfect. Okay. And then you can keep them like this. I just like to format it like this instead. Looks a little bit neater to my eyes. Easier to tell. It's kind of easier to tell what's going on. And then we can add URLs at these points later on. Well, you can see, right, these are just 4 things of text here, right? About, services, projects, contact. But look at the semantic relationships and structure that we had to impart within these for them to be able to properly be given the, the most meaningful HTML setup that we can possibly come up with, So again, the HTML isn't too crazy, but there are quite a few things that you have to learn in order to give the best meaning, the best semantics to your content. So let me make sure I'm checking on you guys. Okay. So with this, let's do Let's see. Still working on this. In fact, let me change this to being a little bit more. There we go. That way I can see that. Okay, so let's start to style this a little bit more. So I'm going to start giving classes to things because classes are just nicer to work with, honestly, in my opinion. And they have higher specificity. So style changes that I make to classes are probably, there shouldn't really be any issues with them. So we'll do the image later. Just keep that as is for now. So for the nav element, there's not anything that I have to, well, is there? I guess I should put this in a div. I'll tell you why in a second. Let me do this. I do that. Okay, so I have my header here, right, which is going to be everything on top. And then I have the image here, which is the logo, and then I have the nav bar here. Now I'm going to want to set the image and the nav bar side by side. To style that effectively, I'm going to use this div here. Again, divs don't have semantic. A lot of people use them just for styling purposes. So that is what I'm going to do here. I'm going to do, I want to say, I can just do like flex. I'll say .uFlex to display flex. Oh yeah, I guess I should keep my body for red. There we go. Okay, we'll talk about that later. But so now I have them side by side at least. But now these links are still stacked in of themselves. They still have the dots. The reason why they have these dots here is because we are using a list. And thankfully, we can actually style that, though, to get rid of that. So we can do nav list. And I can say, hey, I do not want these dots in here. So let's do list style, actually. Do list style none. I'll get rid of the dots. And then we can also use flex on it to lay these individual li elements, lay these guys, instead of vertically, we'll have them go horizontal. So we'll do display flex. And there we go. Okay, so now they need some space in between them. So now that we're using flex, we can use the gap property, which again just kind of creates some space. And then we can also do specify content. And we're essentially going to make it so this is all the way on the left-hand side, the logo. This stuff is all the way on the right-hand side. So we can use space between should work. Wait, no. Oh, wait, actually, let me see. Might not be taking up the full length of the page. If that's the case. Yeah, so this is not, so you can see your dev tools are pretty important. So I didn't go into much detail on these guys or on this thing, but sometimes there's behavior that you just can't understand at first as to like why your website is behaving in this way, why your code is working in this way. A lot of browsers nowadays have developer tools that will essentially let you analyze your web page and kind of inspect it under the microscope and just show you perspectives on things that you otherwise won't be able to see. So we can see here that I just do not have the full width of the screen available to me right now. So I'm going to have to style this in a way to where it does do that. If I do width, I do 100%. Any luck yet? Nope. Wonder why. Let's see. Div uFlex. Oh, maybe I should do do that. Interesting. Let me play around with this a little bit. So this is, so the header above it is taking up the full length. Oh, okay. Huh. I just have this one thing here. Yeah. Like 1,000 pixels. It's so goofy. This and this. Oh, okay, actually. Okay, I actually set that up wrong. So it should probably be just by content. Space, yeah. Space between. Okay. So where did I put that before? Oh, I put it on the nav list. That's why. My bad. There we go. Sometimes you run into silly stuff like that. But now you can see I have these on the opposite sides of the screen. Now it's a little bit extreme, all the way over there, all the way over here. You can see in the design, it's not that, they're like not all the way to the side of the screen. But again, we can tackle that with a little bit more CSS. But we got the basic layout. I mean, all I would have to do is like change the colors here, change the font, make it so this isn't so stretched vertically. Add some like padding or some space on the sides so that they come in. Of course, change the background color. In fact, let's change the background color. Will it give it to me? Which is part of like an image. It is part of an image. I think you can do, hold on, I just learned something nice recently. Oh, what is it? There's like a color picker that you can use in here. This one, my friend just showed me this the other day. Oh, I can't remember the, let me see. Again, Google is your best friend. So Figma color picker shortcut. Control C. Okay, so let's try Control C. I was gonna say that's for copying, so I don't know why I said that. Anyways, I mean, I'll just use the light blue. That works. I could sit here, you know, find how to get the color picker out, or I could like screen cap this, use the color picker in another program, yada yada. Not the biggest deal. Well, Frontend Mentor will actually give you your colors too, in their style guide. So I could use that. I want to see if I could be a little bit more creative with it. Or not creative, but a little bit more resourceful. But I mean, I guess this is pretty resourceful, just taking what they give you. Yeah, we can just do like light blue. That'll work. Yeah, it works fine for now. With that, actually, we're kind of getting close to the end here. Let me see. But I mean, you start to see how everything comes together, right? You start to see how the HTML and the CSS have to be written in reference to each other. You see how you have to split things up in the HTML for semantic reasons. And then eventually, right, if there's like a button or anything in here that we want to utilize, we'd have to set up JavaScript to connect with that button. So let's see. I think we can start to wrap it up here. I know usually like people, they like to start a little bit earlier before the stream. So, okay. Well, I mean, at this point, if anyone has any questions in the chat about HTML, CSS, JavaScript, by all means, please let me know. Someone had asked about React earlier. So working with HTML, CSS, JavaScript directly, people don't do that as much nowadays. Now, there are some exceptions. I know some people that will make websites for small businesses. They only need like 5 web pages, pretty simple stuff. And they make a living just making websites with HTML and CSS. For people that want to do more websites that are a bit more involved, that handle more complex tasks, typically they have to use, typically they start using more complex tools, more abstracted tools. Because like if you're working for a high level organization, you know, like anything with any sort of complexity to their web department, you're not going to be doing HTML, CSS, JavaScript by hand like we're seeing. Usually there's more sophisticated tools that scale better and that just work better within the context of a large scale production. So there's stuff like React, which Facebook uses, and that was developed by Facebook. Very, very common in web development nowadays. There's Next.js, which is I think it's kind of like it's kind of built upon React, which is starting to get some steam. That's kind of like JavaScript at its basis, but also does HTML, CSS. So there's also like tools like Tier 1 CSS, which again is just supposed to, it kind of uses CSS as its basis, but it goes on to like have a more sophisticated development experience. But with all of those tools, fundamentally, they work with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to a large extent, if not entirely. In fact, a big complaint from people that I hear nowadays is they'll go through boot camps where they learn React, but they don't really get a good foundation in HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Sometimes you have to know how to use HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Sometimes there's issues, there's problems that takes that more fundamental knowledge to be able to solve something, say in React, or just to set up something simpler that doesn't really need React or anything like that. That is why having this foundational knowledge is so important, because everything works off of it. Everything ultimately does come down to HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Like React ultimately kind of translate everything into basic HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So that's a question that gets brought up quite a bit in this sort of conversation of like more abstracted web development tools and technologies like React, Next.js, Tailwind, stuff like that. So just worth addressing. Okay, well, I think that kind of brings things to a close at this point. We saw how HTML, CSS, JavaScript ultimately give websites their meaning, appearance, and functionality, respectively. And we even saw us tackle a couple designs using what we learned with those technologies. So pretty exciting stuff, ultimately. If looks like there's no questions in the chat or anything of the sort, so I am going to start to bring things to a close. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope this was insightful. I hope you took some good stuff away from this. And with that, just stay tuned for the next stream and have a great Global Hack Week.